A pregnant single mother was fired for being late, but when the CEO discovered the dismissal, he was shocked. He was in love with her. Secrets came to light, and their lives changed forever. A story of overcoming, redemption, and love. Get ready, because this story will touch your heart. Subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and comment on where you are watching from. The autumn in Brooklyn painted the streets with golden hues as Sarah Johnson hurried along the uneven cobblestone sidewalks. Her hands trembled slightly as she clutched her worn synthetic leather bag, trying to protect her 7-month baby bump that protruded beneath the navy blazer that no longer fit properly. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee wafted from the small cafes in the neighborhood, mingling with the scent of rain that threatened to fall at any moment. "Damn traffic," she muttered to herself, checking her watch for the 10th time. 8:40 in the morning. 40 minutes late. Her daughter Sophia, 8 years old, had woken up with a fever during the night, and Sarah had to take her to Mrs. Thompson's house before she could leave home. The apartment in East Village was an hour away from the office, and the subway had experienced issues on the Green Line. At 32, Sarah had built a solid reputation as an administrative assistant at Corporate Events, Inc., a corporate event company occupying 2 floors of a modern commercial building in Brooklyn. She was known for her obsessive attention to detail, her ability to solve complex logistical problems, and her brutal honesty that sometimes put her in delicate situations with her superiors. But no one questioned her competence or commitment. The mirrored elevator reflected her tired image as it ascended to the 8th floor. Deep circles surrounded her brown eyes, and her usually impeccable dark hair was slightly disheveled from the morning rush. Her delicate features carried an expression of determination that had become her trademark since she became a single mother for the 2nd time. The elevator doors opened, revealing the familiar office environment. Workstations organized in an island format, glass walls separating meeting rooms, and the constant buzz of ringing phones and printers whirring. The characteristic smell of coffee mixed with the cold air conditioning created an atmosphere that Sarah knew like the back of her hand. "Sarah Johnson, I need to speak with you now." The sharp voice of Patricia Mendonça, the HR manager, echoed through the office like a whip. Patricia was a 38-year-old woman, always impeccably dressed in designer suits and high-heeled shoes that echoed down the corridors as a warning of her approach. Her blonde hair, kept in a tight bun, framed a face that rarely showed any sign of compassion. "Good morning, Patricia. I'm sorry for being late. I can explain—" "You don't need to explain anything," Patricia interrupted, her voice laden with a cold authority that made all nearby employees stop typing to observe the scene. "Meeting room now!" Sarah felt her stomach tighten. She knew that tone. During her 3 years working at the company, she had witnessed Patricia use the exact same tone with other employees who were fired. But her, impossible. Her reports were always on time. Her clients were the most satisfied in the company, and even pregnant, her productivity remained above average. The small meeting room smelled of polished wood furniture and had only an oval table with 4 chairs. The glass walls offered a panoramic view of the office, where dozens of curious eyes tried to discreetly follow what was happening. "Sit down," Patricia ordered, remaining standing in an intimidating posture. Her icy blue eyes fixed on Sarah with an intensity that made the pregnant woman feel like a defendant before a tribunal. "Patricia, if this is about my lateness today—" "This is the 5th time you've been late in 2 months, Patricia said, opening a folder that seemed to have been prepared specifically for this moment. "Your attendance has been inconsistent, your performance has declined, and frankly, we can no longer tolerate this kind of behavior." "My performance?" Sarah felt her voice rise an octave. "I closed the contract with ExxonMobil last week. I organized the Apple event that was deemed the best of the year by management. That was before your pregnancy started affecting your work," Patricia retorted, her voice taking on an even sharper tone. "Let's be practical here, Sarah. A pregnant single mother cannot give the full dedication this company requires. It's better for all of us to end this now." The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah could hear her own heart pounding in her ears, mixed with the distant sound of traffic in Brooklyn and the hum of the air conditioning. Her hands instinctively moved to protect her belly, where she felt the babies. She still didn't know they were twins, moving restlessly as if they could sense her anxiety. "You can't fire me for being pregnant," she finally said, her voice trembling but firm. "That's illegal." Patricia smiled with a coldness that made Sarah shiver. "I'm not firing you for being pregnant. I'm firing you for unjustified absences and declining performance. The pregnancy is just an unfortunate coincidence. 5 late arrivals in 2 months do not justify a dismissal." Sarah exploded, standing up from the chair with more force than she intended. "I've worked here for 3 years. I've never had a single formal complaint." "Sit down," Patricia ordered, her voice taking on a dangerously low tone. "You're being hysterical. That only confirms my decision." The word hysterical hit Sarah like a punch in the stomach. It was exactly what her ex-husband used to say when she tried to defend her viewpoints, when she questioned his irresponsible decisions with money, when she asked him to help more with Sophia. The same word used to belittle, to invalidate, to reduce any legitimate argument to a female emotional outburst. "I'm not hysterical," she said slowly, each word laden with wounded dignity. "I am a competent employee, being unjustly fired by a manager who clearly has personal issues with me." Patricia's face contorted in an expression of suppressed anger. "Your belongings are being packed as we speak. Security will escort you to the exit. You will receive your severance pay as per the law." Outside the conference room, Sarah could see her colleagues pretending to work while discreetly watching. Anna from accounting had tears in her eyes. John from marketing shook his head in disapproval. They all knew this was an injustice, but no one dared to speak out against Patricia. What none of them knew was that on the 15th floor, behind the solid mahogany door of his executive office, David Miller was watching everything through the security cameras. His fists were clenched, and a vein throbbed on his forehead as he watched the woman he had secretly loved for months being publicly humiliated. David was 45 years old and had built Corporate Events Inc. from the ground up, after graduating with a degree in business administration. Tall, around 6'1", with perfectly styled grey hair and dark green eyes that reflected sharp intelligence, he always maintained an elegant posture in his tailored suits. But behind the facade of a successful executive, he carried the scars of a tumultuous divorce that had ended just 6 months prior. He knew every detail of Sarah's work. He had read every report she produced and was aware of every satisfied client she had won over. More than that, he had observed her tireless dedication, the way she treated her colleagues with respect, how she remained focused even when the challenges of personal life seemed overwhelming. "This can't be happening," he murmured to himself, reaching for the phone to call Patricia and stop this injustice. But he hesitated. How would he explain that he was monitoring the situation? How could he justify his interference in an HR decision without revealing his feelings? As a recently divorced CEO, rumors about his personal life were already circulating, and publicly getting involved in defending a pregnant employee could create devastating speculation. Meanwhile, Sarah walked through the halls of Corporate Events Inc. for the last time, escorted by an embarrassed security guard who had known her for 3 years. Her few personal belongings, a photo of Sophia, a mug that read "Best Mom in the World" given by her daughter on Mother's Day, and a small, succulent plant, were packed in a cardboard box that seemed to symbolize the abrupt end of her financial stability. The elevator descended silently, each floor passed representing another step down the ladder of her fortune. When the doors opened on the ground floor, Sarah took a deep breath of the Brooklyn air, now heavy with the scent of impending rain that was finally beginning to fall in thick drops on the cobblestone sidewalks. The autumn rain had transformed the streets of the East Village into a melancholic symphony of droplets against the zinc roofs and wet asphalt. Sarah climbed the 3 flights of stairs to her apartment with heavy legs, burdened both by the weight of her pregnancy and the emotional load she carried since her dismissal the previous week. The narrow hallway smelled of a mix of spices wafting from neighboring apartments, sautéed garlic, fresh cilantro, and the unmistakable aroma of beans cooking. Before opening the door to apartment 32, she paused for a moment, resting her forehead against the chipped green-painted wood. She needed to gather strength to face Sophia, who would surely have 1,000 questions about why her mom was home on a Tuesday afternoon. How could she explain to an 8-year-old that the adult world was sometimes cruel and unfair? "Mum, you're home early!" Sophia exclaimed as soon as Sarah opened the door. The girl was sitting at the kitchen table, surrounded by school books and scattered colored pencils. Her curly hair, inherited from her mother, was tied in a messy ponytail, and her cheeks still bore the imprints of her afternoon nap. The 2-bedroom apartment was small, but Sarah had managed to turn it into a cozy home with a lot of love and creativity. The living room walls were decorated with framed drawings by Sophia in simple frames, bought at the flea market in Chinatown. The beige sofa, purchased used from a local furniture store, was covered with a crocheted blanket that her mother had made years ago. The kitchen window overlooked the busy 13th Street, where the constant sound of cars, buses, and street vendors created the soundtrack of urban life in New York City. "How was school today, sweetheart?" Sarah asked, forcing a smile as she put down her bag and headed to the refrigerator. The old appliance roared too loudly but still worked, a small victory in a life full of challenges. "Aunt Carol said you didn't show up for the parent-teacher meeting this morning," Sophia said, not looking up from the notebook where she was drawing a house with stick figures. She was worried. Sarah felt her chest tighten. The meeting about Sophia's school performance was important, but it had happened exactly when she was being fired. Another cascading consequence of a decision she hadn't made. "Something came up at work, honey. But don't worry, I'll call Aunt Carol and schedule another time." "Okay," Sophia replied, adding windows to her drawn house. "Mom, is the baby in your belly going to be a boy or a girl?" The innocent question hit Sarah like a dagger. In 2 weeks, she would have to do the anatomy ultrasound, but how would she pay for it without health insurance? The dismissal meant the immediate loss of medical benefits, and the severance pay would barely cover 3 months of rent and basic expenses. "We don't know yet, sweetheart. It's a surprise." That night, after putting Sophia to bed with a story, once upon a time, there were brave princesses who always found a solution to their problems. Sarah sat at the kitchen table with a pile of bills and a cheap calculator. The fluorescent light flickered occasionally, casting nervous shadows on the walls, as she tried to make numbers that simply didn't add up. Rent went $200, utilities $180, electricity, water, internet $350, groceries $600, medications for Sophia $120, transportation $200. The total came to $2,650, but her emergency fund had only $3,800, barely enough for just over a month of survival. The phone vibrated on the table, interrupting her distressing calculations. It was her mother, Mrs. Thompson, calling from her public housing apartment on the East Side, where she had lived alone since becoming a widow 5 years ago. "Hi. Mom, Sarah, sweetheart, how are you? I've been thinking about you all day." Mrs. Thompson's voice carried that maternal concern that was both comforting and overwhelming. At 58, she had raised Sarah and her 2 brothers practically alone, working as a cleaner in downtown offices to ensure they all received an education. "I'm fine. Well, I'm just a little tired. Sarah Johnson, I've known you since you were born. Don't lie to your mother. What happened?" The firm yet affectionate tone of Mrs. Thompson broke down Sarah's defenses. The tears she had managed to hold back all week finally began to stream down her face. "I got fired, Mom. I was let go because I'm pregnant." The silence on the other end of the line lasted only a few seconds, but it felt like an eternity. "Those bastards!" Mrs. Thompson exploded, using language she reserved only for the most serious situations.
That's a crime, Sarah.
You're going to sue those bastards. Mom, lawsuits take years. I need money now. I need a job now. Sophia needs stability now. Come live with me, sweetheart. Bring Sophia. You two and the babies can fit here. Mrs. Thompson's generous offer touched Sarah deeply, but she knew her mother's financial reality. The pension from a minimum wage job barely covered the basic expenses of one person, let alone an entire family. Mum, you can hardly support yourself. How will you support 3 more people? We'll manage, sweetheart. Family is for this. No, Mom, I won't be a burden in your life. I've been dependent for too long when I was a child. I'll find a solution. After hanging up, Sarah stared out the kitchen window at the busy street below. A man was pushing an ice cream cart while shouting, "Ice cream! Fresh ice cream!" to attract customers. A woman was sweeping the sidewalk in front of a small grocery store, preparing to close. Normal life continued its course, while her world was crumbling. On Thursday, she began to look for work with the fierce determination she had inherited from her mother. She dressed in her best business attire, black pants and a white blouse that still managed to partially conceal her belly, and set out across the city delivering resumes. The first stop was a digital marketing company on Fifth Avenue. The receptionist, a young woman with colorful hair and decorated nails, barely looked up from her computer screen when Sarah explained she was there to drop off a resume. "We only accept applications through the website," she said, showing no interest. "But I'd like to speak to someone in HR in person. I have 3 years of experience in website, only through the website." The second company, an advertising agency in Midtown, had a more subtle approach to rejection. The HR manager, a middle-aged woman with designer glasses, received Sarah politely. "Your resume is very good," she said, flipping through the 2 printed pages from a local print shop. "But unfortunately, we don't have any open positions at the moment for someone with your profile." The discreet yet unmistakable glance at Sarah's belly made it clear what the profile in question was. The third, fourth, and fifth companies followed the same pattern. Superficial education, empty promises of "we'll be in touch," and the unspoken certainty that a 7-month pregnant woman was not exactly what they were looking for in a new employee. By late afternoon, Sarah was sitting on a bench in Republic Square, her feet aching inside the low-heeled shoes she had insisted on wearing. To make a good impression, pigeons pecked at breadcrumbs around her feet as she watched the frantic movement of people returning from work, people who had the security of a job to return to the next day. That's when her phone rang. The number wasn't saved in her contacts, but she answered with the hope that it was one of the companies where she had left her resume. "Hello. Is this Sarah?" "Yes, who is this?" "This is from Sweet Delight's Bakery at the Municipal Market. You left a resume here this morning. Can we talk tomorrow morning?" Sarah felt her heart race. The bakery was a desperate stop she had made at the Municipal Market, more out of impulse than real hope. The owner, Mr. Smith, had looked at her belly with an expression she couldn't decipher, but at least he hadn't immediately rejected her. "Of course. What time?" 8 in the morning. "But I should warn you that the job is physically demanding. You'll be on your feet a lot carrying weight. I don't know if in your condition." "I can handle it," Sarah said quickly, perhaps too quickly. "I need to work." That night, she lay in bed listening to Sophia breathe softly in the next room and feeling the babies moving restlessly in her belly, as if they could sense their mother's anxiety. Through the slightly open window, the nighttime sounds of the East Village drifted in. Car engines, distant voices of neighbors chatting on the sidewalk, and the constant noise of a city that never sleeps. Tomorrow would be a new day, perhaps the first day of a new phase. Or maybe just another day in the long journey of proving to the world and to herself that she was strong enough. In the early hours of Saturday morning, Central Park had an almost magical atmosphere. The morning mist was still dissipating among the canopies of the century-old trees, and the melodious song of the robins echoed through the crisp autumn air. Sarah Johnson walked slowly along the walking trail, one hand resting on her belly that had already completed 8 months, the other holding a water bottle that felt more like a mandatory accessory than something she actually intended to use. She had been working at Sweet Treats Bakery for 2 weeks, and her swollen feet protested with every step on the park's asphalt. But those moments of peace were the only times she could think clearly. Far from the frantic pace of Grand Central Market, the constant smell of sugar and flour, and the financial worries that kept her awake at night, working at the bakery was just as demanding as Mr. Smith had warned. From 6 in the morning to 2 in the afternoon, she stood behind the counter, preparing chocolate truffles, coconut balls, and peanut butter candies for customers ranging from local merchants to tourists enchanted by the spices and exotic fruits. Her hands, once soft from office work, now bore small cuts from crystallized sugar and permanent chocolate stains. Sorry. A male voice pulled her from her thoughts. A man had stopped right in front of her on the trail, clearly out of breath from his morning run. He wore an obviously expensive grey running outfit, imported sneakers that cost more than her monthly salary at the bakery, and a sports watch that gleamed discreetly on his wrist. Sarah looked up and felt the world stop for a second. It was David Miller, the CEO of Corporate Events, Inc., the man who had built an empire in corporate events, whose office on the 15th floor she had never set foot in, but whose reputation for demanding perfection echoed through all the hallways of the company. Sarah. The surprise in his voice seemed genuine. David stopped running, completely, and looked at her with an intensity that made her feel suddenly self-conscious. She was wearing an old pair of gym pants that barely covered her belly, a faded t-shirt from the last charity run she participated in years ago, and worn-out sneakers that were more comfortable than appropriate for exercise. "Mr. Miller," she said, trying to maintain her professional composure even in those bizarre circumstances. "David, please. Call me David." He ran a hand through his slightly sweaty grey hair from the run. "I heard about what happened at the company. The dismissal. It was a terrible injustice." His words caught her completely off guard. During her 3 years working at Corporate Events, Inc., David Miller had been an almost mythical figure, someone everyone knew existed, but who was rarely seen by the employees on the lower floors. That he knew her name was already surprising. That he knew the details of her dismissal was disconcerting. "Thank you," she stammered, unsure of how to react. "May I ask how you are? Financially, I mean. I know the transition must be difficult." The direct question about her financial situation should have sounded intrusive, but there was something in David's tone that conveyed genuine concern rather than morbid curiosity. Still, Sarah felt her defenses rise automatically. "I'm fine. I found another job." "At Grand Central Market," he said, and immediately realized he had revealed too much information. A friend of mine saw you there." "Small world, New York can be sometimes." Sarah narrowed her eyes. She didn't believe in such convenient coincidences. "Are you following me?" David blushed slightly, an unexpected reaction from a man known for maintaining absolute control of situations. No, of course not. I've been running here every Saturday for 5 years. Always at the same time, always the same route." He gestured vaguely toward the trail. "It's my way of clearing my mind before the weekend." There was something in the way he said those words that made Sarah believe him. A subtle vulnerability that contrasted with the image of the relentless executive she had built in her head. "Can I walk you to a bench?" he asked. "You look tired." Sarah wanted to protest, to say she was perfectly fine, but the truth was her feet were throbbing and her back ached in places she didn't even know existed. She nodded, and they walked in silence to a wooden bench near the lake, where ducks lazily swam among the reflections of clouds in the water. "My ex-wife used to bring me here when we were dating," David suddenly said, looking at the water. "She said it was the only place in New York where I could truly relax." The mention of his ex-wife created a strange atmosphere between them. Sarah knew through office rumors that David had recently divorced Isabella Carter. a socialite known in business circles for her charity work and fundraising events that were more about networking than helping those in need. The divorce was complicated, Sarah asked, immediately regretting the intimate question. David smiled bitterly. She said I was emotionally absent, that I prioritized the company above all else, that our kids barely knew me. He paused, watching a duck dive after a fish. The hardest part is that she was right. His brutal honesty echoed something in Sarah's own experience. Her ex-husband had used similar arguments when he abandoned her while she was pregnant with Emily, claiming she was too obsessed with responsibilities and didn't know how to enjoy life. Sometimes people use our traits against us, she said slowly. They call our dedication obsession, our responsibility coldness, our independence stubbornness. David looked at her with a surprised expression, as if she had verbalized something he had felt but never managed to express. Exactly. As if working hard to support her family was seen as a character flaw. And as if needing help was synonymous with weakness, added Sarah, thinking about her own resistance to accepting her mother's offer to share the apartment. They sat in silence for a few minutes, watching families begin to arrive at the park for weekend leisure. Children ran between the trees, while parents followed them with digital cameras, trying to capture moments of spontaneous happiness. "Sarah, I need to tell you something," David finally said, turning to face her. "I grew up here in New York, too, not in the Gardens or in Brooklyn. In the East Side, in a 2-room house with my mother and 3 siblings. The revelation caught her completely off guard. The East Side was exactly where her mother lived now, one of the most distant and economically challenged neighborhoods in New York. "My mother worked as a housekeeper," he continued. "She left home at 5 in the morning and returned at 9 at night, 6 days a week. On Sundays, she still did laundry for others to earn extra money." Sarah felt something stir inside her chest. It wasn't just the similarity of their stories, but the way he told it, without dramatization or self-pity, just as facts that had shaped who he had become. "How did you get out of there?" she asked. "I studied a lot. I got a scholarship to study business administration at NYU, worked during the day, and studied at night for 4 years. I almost went crazy in the process." He smiled with a mix of pride and melancholy. "The company started in the shared apartment where I lived. 3 partners, 1 borrowed computer, and a lot of courage. And now you have a 15th floor office and drive a BMW, Sarah said, unable to hide a slight tone of admiration. "And now I have a 15th floor office and drive a BMW, he confirmed. "But I still wake up at 5 in the morning thinking I'm going to be late for something important." The confession humanized him in a way that Sarah wasn't prepared to handle. The man sitting next to her on the bench was not the unreachable CEO of Corporate Events, Inc., but someone who carried the same insecurities and fears that she knew intimately. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked. David was silent for a long moment, as if carefully weighing his next words. "Because during the 3 years you worked at the company, I observed how you treated everyone with the same respect, from the security guard to the directors. I saw how you managed to solve problems that others considered impossible. I saw how you never used your competence to belittle your colleagues." He paused. "And because when I heard about your dismissal, I realized that our company had lost exactly the kind of person I would want more of, not less." His words created a whirlwind of emotions in Sarah: gratitude, confusion, distrust, and something deeper that she didn't want to name. "Mr. David," she corrected herself, "I really appreciate your words, but I don't understand where you're going with this." He stood up from the bench and extended his hand to her, a chivalrous gesture that seemed natural for him. "I don't want to go anywhere," he simply said. "I just wanted you to know that the dismissal was not a reflection of your worth as a professional or as a person. It was a wrong decision by someone who doesn't truly know you." As they walked back to the park entrance together, Sarah felt that something fundamental had changed. Not just in the way she saw David Miller, but in the way she saw her own situation. For the first time in weeks, she felt that maybe she wasn't completely alone in this difficult moment of her life. Monday arrived, with a fine, persistent rain that turned the streets of Grand Central Market into a chaos of vendors rushing to protect their goods. Sarah arrived at Sweet Treats Bakery at 5:40 in the morning, 20 minutes earlier than usual, trying to compensate for the scattered thoughts that had kept her awake during the night. The meeting with David in the park had stirred something inside her that she preferred to keep buried. "You arrived early today," commented Mr. Smith, a 60-year-old man with a greying mustache and thick hands from working with sugar since he was 16. He was organizing the trays of sweets in the display case, each chocolate truffle perfectly aligned like little chocolate soldiers. "I couldn't sleep well," admitted Sarah, tying on the pink apron that made her look more like a doll than a woman 8 months pregnant about to burst. "Is the baby moving a lot?" asked Mrs. Carroll, the other employee at the bakery, a robust lady who had worked there for 15 years and treated all customers as if they were her own children. "It's not the baby," Sarah said, starting to separate the ingredients for the first batch of peanut butter candies of the day. "It's life that's stirring a lot." The hours passed in a comforting routine of sugar, butter, and condensed milk. The morning rush at the market was intense, Arab merchants buying sweets to resell in their stores, housewives picking chocolate truffles for children's birthdays, tourists photographing everything as if it were a living museum of culinary delights. It was during the lunch break that Sarah noticed something strange. Walking between the stalls of the market, she noticed several merchants greeting her with a respect different from usual. Mr. Johnson, from the spice stall, insisted on giving her a packet of cinnamon as a gift for the expecting mother. Mrs. Smith, who sold candied fruits, offered her a chair when she saw her passing, claiming that a pregnant woman shouldn't be on her feet for too long. "How strange," she murmured to herself, accepting a glass of cold coconut water that the vendor adamantly refused to charge her for. The strangeness increased when she got home that night. Emily greeted her at the door with a radiant expression that she hadn't seen in weeks. "Mom, Aunt Carol from school called today." Sarah's heart raced. Calls from school were never good news. "What happened, sweetheart?" She said, "Someone paid all my overdue tuition. And they also paid for my school supplies and a new uniform for next semester." Sarah sat heavily on the couch, trying to process the information. The overdue tuition amounted to almost $2,000, money she simply didn't have, causing her sleepless nights of worry. Who paid? Aunt Carol said it was someone who asked not to be named. An anonymous donation for families in need. Emily jumped onto her mother's lap, or rather the little space left between her belly and her knees. "Does that mean I can stay in school?" "It does, love," said Sarah, hugging her daughter while trying to hold back tears of relief and suspicion that fought to escape. On Tuesday, the strangeness turned into certainty when she received a phone call from the clinic where she had been going for prenatal care. "Mrs. Johnson, this is St. Helena Clinic. It's about your tests." Sarah's stomach churned. Without health insurance, she had only managed to do the most basic tests, always paying out of pocket and always weeks late. "What about the tests?" "No, nothing is wrong with the results. It's just that, well, all your future consultations and tests have been paid for. Even the delivery." An anonymous benefactor covered everything through a lawyer. Sarah almost dropped the phone. "What do you mean, anonymous benefactor?" "I can't give details. Those are express instructions. But I can schedule your morphology ultrasound for tomorrow if you'd like. And also arrange an appointment with the private obstetrician that the person specified." That night, after putting Emily to bed, Sarah sat in the kitchen staring at the phone on the table. She knew exactly who the anonymous benefactor was, and the certainty left her feeling simultaneously grateful and furious. David Miller was interfering in her life. On Wednesday, she made a decision. Instead of going straight home after work, she took the subway to Brooklyn. The building of Corporate Events, Inc. looked different now that she was no longer part of that world. The doorman, who knew her, looked visibly uncomfortable when she asked to speak with the CEO. "He's in a meeting, Mrs. Johnson." "Then I'll wait." And she waited. For 2 hours, sitting in the elegant reception area on the ground floor, watching well-dressed employees come and go, while her belly protested against the uncomfortable chair and her feet swelled inside her work shoes. When David finally came down at 7:30 in the evening, he looked genuinely surprised to see her there. "Sarah, what are you doing here?" "We need to talk," she said, standing up with some difficulty. In private, David's office on the 15th floor was exactly as she had imagined. Modern, impersonal, with a panoramic view of New York that cost more in rent per month than she earned in a year. Bookshelves organized by color, abstract paintings that probably cost a fortune, and a conference table that could comfortably seat 12 people. "You can sit," he said, gesturing to a leather armchair that seemed to have cost more than all the furniture in her apartment. "You paid for Emily's tuition." It wasn't a question. David paused mid-motion while pouring water into a crystal glass. And you paid for my medical tests, and somehow convinced half the vendors at the market to treat me like I was their long-lost daughter." David set the glass down on the table and looked her straight in the eye. Yes, the simplicity of the confession disarmed her for a second. "Why?" "Because you shouldn't be going through this. Because the firing was unfair. Because—" He hesitated, running a hand through his hair. "Because I couldn't sleep knowing you were working in a place that required physical effort during a high-risk pregnancy." "High-risk pregnancy? How do you know it's high risk?" Another hesitation, longer this time. "I paid for the private nurse who has been discreetly monitoring your condition for the past 2 weeks. The anger Sarah had tried to control finally exploded. "You did what?" She stood up from the armchair so quickly that she felt dizzy for a moment. David stepped toward her, hands raised in a protective gesture. "Calm down, please. Don't tell me to calm down. You violated my privacy. You are spying on me. The words tangled in her throat. "You are trying to control me." "I'm not trying to control anything. I'm trying to help." "I didn't ask for your help." "I don't need your charity." "This isn't charity," David shouted, finally losing his composure. This is... He stopped mid-sentence, as if realizing he was about to say something he shouldn't. "This is what?" Sarah asked, her voice dangerously low. The silence that followed was charged with electric tension. David looked at her with an intensity that made something stir in her chest, something that had nothing to do with the babies in her belly. "This is because I care about you," he finally said, his voice almost a whisper. "More than I should. More than is appropriate." His words hung in the air between them like a confession that completely changed the nature of the conversation. Sarah felt her defenses waver for a moment before they reinforced again. "You don't know me," she said. "You are romanticizing a situation you saw from afar. You are feeling guilty about the firing and confusing that with whatever this is. I've watched you for 3 years, Sarah. I saw how you treated your colleagues when you thought no one was looking. I saw how you stayed late to finish an important project. I saw how you smiled when you managed to solve a complex problem." His voice grew more intense. "And I saw how you cried, discreetly in the bathroom the day I found out I was pregnant, because I was afraid of how it would affect my job." The last piece of information hit her like a punch to the stomach. It was true. She had cried in the women's bathroom that day, thinking she was completely alone. "Were you watching me in the bathroom?" No, I walked by the door when you were leaving. You were clearly emotional and you decided that gave you the right to interfere in my life. I decided that you deserved support during a difficult time. Without asking me, without giving me a chance to choose, you unilaterally decided you knew what was best for me." David opened and closed his mouth a few times, clearly realizing he had stepped into dangerous territory. You're right. I should have asked first. You shouldn't have just asked first. You shouldn't have done anything. We barely know each other. A casual meeting in the park doesn't give you the right to rearrange my life." Sarah grabbed her bag and headed for the door. David followed her, clearly desperate to fix the situation. Sarah, please. She turned at the door, one hand on the frame to steady herself. I appreciate what you did for Sophia's tuition and the medical tests. I will find a way to pay you back every penny. But I need you to stop interfering in my life. I need you to leave me alone. And what if I can't? The question caught her completely off guard. There was something in his voice, a raw vulnerability that contrasted with all the executive authority he exuded. What do you mean? What if I can't stop worrying about you? What if I can't pretend I don't care about what happens to you and the babies? Sarah felt something break inside her chest. It wasn't anger, it wasn't gratitude. It was something much more complicated and dangerous. Then you'll have to learn, she said, leaving the room without looking back. But even as she descended in the elevator, even as she crossed the reception area, even as she walked through the streets of Brooklyn to the subway station, she could feel his gaze through the window of the 15th floor, following every step until she disappeared into the crowd. The morphological ultrasound was scheduled for a rainy Thursday morning, and Sarah woke up with a strange feeling in her stomach that had nothing to do with pregnancy nausea. It had been 2 weeks since she last spoke to David, and his absence from her life should have left her relieved. Instead, it had created an unsettling void that she refused to analyze too deeply. The St. Helena Clinic was located in the upscale area of the Upper East Side, a completely different world from East Village where she lived. Sarah got off the bus on Fifth Avenue and walked through the tree-lined streets, observing the elegant houses with well-kept gardens and imported cars parked in the driveways. It was hard to believe that this expensive appointment was paid for, and even harder to accept that she couldn't return the money even if she wanted to. "Sarah Johnson?" called the receptionist, a young, impeccably made-up blonde who smiled with professional warmth. "Dr. Edward is waiting." Dr. Edward Sanchez was around 50, with neatly cut grey hair and a calm manner of speaking that immediately conveyed confidence. His office smelled of lavender and had abstract paintings on the walls that created a relaxing atmosphere. "How are you feeling?" he asked, helping her lie down on the exam table. "Any special discomfort?" "Just the normal fatigue," Sarah replied, trying to relax as he prepared the ultrasound machine, "and a strange feeling that the babies are growing faster than expected." "Babies?" Dr. Edward raised an eyebrow. "Who said there was more than one?" I've always had this feeling. They move a lot, and in different places in my belly at the same time." The doctor smiled and applied the cold gel to her belly. When the image appeared on the monitor, Sarah heard her own breath stop for a second. "Well," Dr. Edward said, moving the probe slowly, "your intuition was absolutely correct." On the screen, 2 small perfect shapes moved independently, each with a heart beating at a slightly different rhythm. 2 heads, 4 arms, 4 legs, 2 completely formed and apparently healthy babies. "Twins," Sarah whispered, feeling tears stream down her face without warning. "Fraternal twins from what I can see. A boy and a girl." Dr. Edward pointed to different parts of the screen, explaining the anatomical details. "Both are developing perfectly. Appropriate size for gestational age, strong hearts, normal movements." The joy for the baby's health was immediately followed by a wave of financial panic. 2 babies meant twice the diapers, twice the clothes, twice the medical expenses. And she, a single mother working in a bakery, trying to support an 8-year-old daughter as well. "Is there anything I should know?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "Any special care?" "Twin pregnancies require more frequent monitoring, especially in the later weeks. And you will need more rest than in a singleton pregnancy." Dr. Edward looked at her with a serious expression. "Given your current job, I imagine this will be a challenge." Sarah thought about the 8-hour days on her feet in the bakery, carrying trays of pastries, going up and down stairs to fetch ingredients from storage. With twins, would it be possible to continue? "I'll manage," she said, more to herself than to the doctor. "Sarah!" Dr. Edward wiped the gel off her belly and helped her sit up. Can I ask a personal question? Do you have a support network? Family, friends, the father of the babies?" The question hurt because it touched exactly on the most vulnerable point of her situation. "I have my mother and my daughter. And a few friends. It was a technical answer to a question that deserved honesty. The truth was that she felt completely alone with that responsibility. And the father of the babies? He's not in our lives, she said quickly. The automatic response she had rehearsed to avoid awkward conversations. Dr. Smith made some notes in the medical record and handed her several ultrasound pictures. Would you like to schedule the next appointment for 2 weeks? And I will prescribe some specific supplements for twin pregnancies. Walking back to the bus stop, Sarah stared at the ultrasound photos. 2 children who depended completely on her. 3 kids to raise alone. The responsibility was overwhelming and exciting at the same time. The phone rang while she was waiting for the bus. It was Emily, calling from the school phone.
Mom, how did it go at the doctor?
Is everything okay with the baby? Everything is fine, sweetheart. Actually, I have a surprise for you. What surprise? Sarah smiled, imagining her daughter's reaction. You're going to have 2 little siblings, twins, a boy and a girl. The silence on the other end of the line lasted so long that Sarah thought the call had dropped. Emily. Twins? The girl's voice exploded, so loud that other passengers at the bus stop turned to look. Mom, that's the most amazing thing in the world. Can I tell my class? Her daughter's genuine joy warmed Sarah's heart in a way she hadn't expected. At least one person was completely happy with the news. That night, after dinner and detailing the news to Emily, who had already started planning how she would organize the room to fit 2 cribs, Sarah lay on the bed with the ultrasound photos spread out over the blanket. That's when she realized that David should know. The idea caught her completely off guard. Had he cared enough to pay for the tests? Did he deserve to know the results? Or would that break the promise to keep him out of her life? She picked up the phone and typed a message several times, deleting everything before sending. What to say? Hi, it's twins, thanks for the tests. I thought you would like to know that your investment revealed 2 babies. Everything sounded strange or sarcastic. Finally, she sent a simple message. The tests you paid for revealed that it's twins. Thank you. The response came in less than 2 minutes. Twins? How are you feeling? Is everything okay with them? Sarah looked at the phone screen, feeling a mix of irritation and something dangerously close to affection. Even trying to keep distance, his concerns seemed genuine. They are healthy. I am processing. Can I help you with anything? Anything? It was exactly the question she had feared and simultaneously hoped for. David, we talked about this. I need to do this alone. 2 babies change everything, Sarah. You will need help. I will manage. How? You work 8 hours a day on your feet, have an 8-year-old daughter to take care of, and now you found out you're having twins. Mathematically, it doesn't add up. His cold logic irritated Sarah because it was irrefutable. It's none of your business. What if I want it to be my business? The question hung between them through the phone screen for several minutes. Sarah typed and deleted different responses, all inadequate for the complexity of what he was suggesting. Finally, she wrote, I need to think. Good night, Sarah. Take care. All 3 of you. She hung up the phone and stared at the ceiling of her room, listening to the nighttime sounds of the East Village through the slightly open window. Cars passing by, neighbors chatting on the sidewalk, the churro vendor shouting his goods on the corner. The reality of the twins was starting to materialize in a concrete way. 2 children who would need simultaneous care, frequent feeding, constant diapers. How would she do this while working full-time? How would she support 4 people on a bakery salary? And why, amidst all these practical concerns, did she keep thinking about David's voice when he said the 3, as if they were a family unit he could protect? On Friday, Mr. Smith called her for a talk at the end of the shift. Sarah, you are an exemplary employee, he began, twisting his cap in his hands in a way that indicated nervousness. But I need to be honest with you. Her stomach sank. The work here is going to get heavier in the coming weeks. It's the holiday season, many orders, a lot of activity. And you, pregnant with twins, he paused significantly. I can't guarantee that you will be able to keep up. Mr. Smith, I can work. I need to work. I know, dear. But what if something happens to you or the babies here? The responsibility would be mine. He sighed heavily. I'm trying to find a solution, but maybe you should consider taking leave earlier. Leave meant no salary. No salary meant not being able to pay rent. Not being able to pay rent meant, how much time do I have? She asked. 2 weeks at most, until I can train someone to temporarily replace you. That night, Sarah sat at the kitchen table with the calculator and bills, trying to make numbers that simply didn't add up. Even with the savings from the layoffs at Corporate Events Inc., she didn't have enough money to survive without working until the babies were born. That's when her phone rang. It was an unknown number. Hello, Sarah? This is Patricia Mendonça. The voice of the former HR manager from Corporate Events Inc. made all the muscles in Sarah's body tense automatically. What do you want? I need to talk to you, in person. It's important. We have nothing to discuss. It's about your dismissal and about David Miller. Sarah almost hung up the phone, but something in Patricia's tone made her hesitate. What about them? I can't talk over the phone. Can you meet me tomorrow? At the cafe on the corner of Corporate Events Inc., 2 o'clock in the afternoon? Curiosity won over aversion. I'm listening. There are things you don't know about your dismissal. Things David didn't tell you. And with that enigmatic sentence, Patricia hung up, leaving Sarah with more questions than answers, and a growing sense that her life, Sarah, was about to complicate things even further. Trying again at Continue Topic 6. Uncomfortable Truths. Café Bean and Cupolas was located at the corner of Harmony Street and Wizard Street, just a few meters from the Corporate Events Inc. building. Sarah arrived 10 minutes late on Saturday afternoon, still breathless from the walk from the subway station. The 8.5-month baby bump made any movement a challenge, especially with twins that seemed to be competing to see who could kick her ribs harder. Patricia was already seated at a table in the back, wearing a casual outfit that still screamed expensive clothes, a beige silk blouse and black dress pants that probably cost more than Sarah's monthly salary at the bakery. Her blonde hair was loose, making her look younger and strangely more vulnerable than Sarah remembered. Thank you for coming, Patricia said, slightly rising from her chair as Sarah approached. You can order anything. It's on me. Just an orange juice, Sarah replied, carefully sitting down in front of her former boss. And be direct. I don't have much time. Patricia nervously fiddled with the cappuccino cup in front of her before finding the courage to speak. Your dismissal. It wasn't my idea. The words rushed out as if she had rehearsed them several times and still feared losing them. What do you mean? I received a call 3 days before I fired you. A specific order to find a reason to let you go. Sarah felt her blood run cold. Order from whom? Patricia looked around the cafe as if she feared being watched, even though the place was practically empty on a Saturday afternoon. Isabella Carter, David's ex-wife. The name hit Sarah like a punch to the stomach. The socialite she only knew from gossip magazines and online pages, always photographed at charity events in designer dresses with calculated smiles. Why would David's ex-wife want you to fire me? Because she knew. Knew what? Patricia took a deep breath, as if the next words would require real physical effort. That David was in love with you, and that this was complicating their divorce process. Sarah felt the world spin slightly around her. Her hands instinctively moved to her belly, where the babies seemed to sense her agitation and began to move restlessly. This is ridiculous. I barely knew David. I worked 3 years at the company and spoke to him, twice? He was watching you, Patricia said, her voice gaining a strange intensity. I noticed it months ago. The way he always found excuses to walk by your floor. How he always knew details of your projects that weren't in the official reports. How irritated he got when other men in the company showed interest in you. You're making this up. Sarah, I worked in HR. It was my job to observe dynamics between employees. And David Miller wasn't exactly discreet in the last few months. The waiter brought the orange juice, and Sarah took a big sip, trying to process the information that seemed to completely reshape her understanding of the past few months. Even if this were true, she finally said, why would that bother his ex-wife? They were getting divorced. Patricia smiled with a bitterness that Sarah hadn't expected. Because Isabella Carter didn't want a divorce. The process was initiated by David, not her. And she was, let's say, doing everything to complicate things. What kind of things? Professional sabotage. She has contacts in all the business circles in New York. She was spreading rumors about corporate events Incadu's financial stability and trying to scare off important clients. Patricia paused, fiddling with her cappuccino again, and threatening to destroy his reputation if the divorce didn't go through on her terms. What terms? Full custody of the children, 70% of the assets, and an outrageous monthly alimony that would practically bankrupt the company. Sarah was starting to understand the complexity of the situation, but she still didn't see how she fit into this puzzle. And where do I come in? You were his weak point. Isabella hired a private investigator who documented every time David watched you, every excuse he made to be near you, every business decision he made thinking of benefiting you. Patricia pulled her phone from her bag and showed Sarah a photo, like this one. On the screen, a photo taken from afar showed David standing by the window of his office, clearly watching the floor below where Sarah worked. The expression on his face was unmistakable. It wasn't just professional attention. She had dozens of photos like this, and she was threatening to use everything in the divorce proceedings to prove that David was emotionally unstable and inappropriately involved with subordinates. So you fired me to protect him. I fired you because she threatened to fire me if I didn't, and because, Patricia hesitated, looking embarrassed, because she offered me a promotion at her company if I cooperated. The final confession left Sarah speechless for a moment. All the humiliation of the dismissal, all the financial struggles, all the stress of the pregnancy, it had all been orchestrated by a woman she didn't even know, to harm a man who was secretly in love with her. Why are you telling me this now? Because I quit Corporate Events Inc. last week. Because I found out that Isabella lied about the promotion. Her company had already filled the position she promised me. And because Patricia looked directly into Sarah's eyes for the first time since the conversation began. Because I did you a terrible injustice, and I need to live with that. And does David know all this? No. He found out about my dismissal, but he doesn't know about Isabella's pressure. He thinks it was a decision I made based on prejudice. Sarah remained silent for several minutes, watching the slow movement of the street through the cafe window. A young couple passed by, pushing a stroller laughing at something the child had done. The scene of domestic normalcy contrasted brutally with the revelation of manipulation and blackmail she had just received. What do you want me to do with this information? That's up to you. I just thought you deserved to know the truth. And why should I believe you? You unjustly fired me, lied about the reasons, and now you show up with this story. Patricia took an envelope from her bag and placed it on the table. Because I have proof. Emails from Isabella, recordings of our phone conversations, documents from the private investigator she hired. She pushed the envelope towards Sarah. It's all here. Sarah looked at the envelope as if it were an explosive artifact. Why are you giving me this? Because David deserves to know the truth about what his ex-wife is doing. And because you deserve to know that he was protecting you even before you two got close. Protecting me how? Do you think it was a coincidence that you were promoted to senior assistant last year? Or the raise you received in March? Or the fact that all your projects always got the best resources? Patricia smiled sadly. David had been in love with you for much longer than you realize. And he was trying to improve your professional life without you noticing. The final revelation was too much. Sarah stood up from the table, took the envelope, and put it in her bag without looking at the contents. I need to go. Sarah, wait. Patricia stood up as well. There's one more thing. What? Isabella knows about the twins, about you two meeting. She's still monitoring the situation. How does she know about the twins? Because she has access to the medical records through the health plan that David signed up for you. She knows they are twins, knows when they are due, and is planning to use all of this against him in court. Sarah felt a wave of nausea that had nothing to do with her pregnancy. What kind of things is she planning? I don't know specifically, but she mentioned something about proving that David is irresponsible and using the situation to ensure he loses everything. Walking back home, Sarah felt the weight of the envelope in her bag as if it were made of lead. The information Patricia had revealed completely changed her understanding of the last few months, but it also created an impossible situation. If she told David everything, she would be admitting that there was a connection between them that went beyond coincidence. If she didn't tell him, she would be allowing him to continue being manipulated by a vindictive ex-wife who was using her as a weapon. And there was another question, more personal and frightening. If David had really been in love with her for so long, if he had tried to protect her and improve her life even before they met in person, what did that mean about her feelings for him? Because the inconvenient truth that she had been avoiding admitting to herself was that the last few weeks without his protective interference had been emptier and lonelier than she had expected. And that every time the phone rang, a part of her hoped it was David asking how she was. That night, after putting Emily to bed, Sarah sat on the bed with the envelope in her hands. Inside were dozens of documents that would definitively prove whether Patricia was telling the truth or concocting an elaborate story for reasons she couldn't imagine. But opening the envelope would mean accepting that her life had become part of a much more complex and dangerous game than she had imagined, and that the choices she made from that moment on would affect not only her and her children, but also a man who had risked much more for her than she had ever known. With the twins moving restlessly in her belly, as if they could sense their mother's tension, Sarah finally opened the envelope and began to read. Topic 7. The inevitable confrontation. The document spread out on Sarah's bed told a story of manipulation and obsession that made her stomach churn. Photographs of David watching her through the office window, emails from Isabella instructing Patricia on how to get rid of the problem, recordings of phone conversations where the socialite coldly planned to destroy any chance of happiness for her ex-husband. The most disturbing was a transcript of a conversation between Isabella and the private investigator, dated just a week ago. "She's pregnant with twins. This is perfect. We'll use this to prove that David is unstable, that he gets involved with vulnerable employees, that he isn't fit to have custody of the children. The judge will love this narrative." Sarah closed her eyes, feeling a slight contraction in her belly that made her stop breathing for a moment. When the sensation passed, she looked at the clock, 3 in the morning. Emily was sleeping soundly in the next room, and the silence of the apartment was broken only by the distant hum of the refrigerator and the occasional sound of cars passing by outside. She picked up her phone and typed a message to David. "We need to talk. Urgent." The response came in less than 2 minutes. "What time?" "Where? Now can you come here?" "Address?" Sarah hesitated. Giving her address meant allowing David to literally enter her personal life, into the small world she had built for herself and Emily. But the documents on the bed made it clear that there was no more time to keep distances. 13th Street, 847, apartment 32, 3rd floor. "I'm on my way." 40 minutes later, Sarah heard careful footsteps climbing the stairs of the building. She had changed out of her pajamas into workout pants and a loose t-shirt, brushed her teeth and tried to minimally tidy her hair. But she still felt vulnerable, welcoming him into her home, especially in the middle of the night. David knocked gently on the door, clearly aware of the hour. When she opened it, he was standing in the narrow hallway, wearing jeans and a casual shirt, with a look of concern that made something inside her tighten. "Is everything okay? Are the babies all right?" "Come in," she said, stepping aside to make room. "And keep it down, Emily is sleeping." The small apartment seemed to shrink even more with his presence. David discreetly looked around, absorbing the details. Emily's drawings on the refrigerator, the coffee table covered with school books, the sofa where a blanket was folded over cushions that still bore the imprint of someone who had dozed off there. "Coffee?" offered Sarah, more out of nervousness than hospitality. "Better not, given the time." He carefully sat on the edge of the sofa. "What happened?" Sarah sat in the armchair facing him, creating a physical distance she hoped would help her maintain mental clarity. "I've received information about my termination, about why it really happened." David's expression changed immediately, becoming more alert. "What kind of information?" "Patricia reached out to me. She told me everything." Sarah picked up some documents from the side table. "Your ex-wife orchestrated my termination to hurt you in the divorce process." The silence that followed was deafening. David remained completely still for several seconds, processing the words. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and dangerously controlled. "Show me." Sarah extended the documents, watching his face as he read. She saw the exact moment when complete understanding dawned. His fists clenched, a vein popped on his forehead, and his eyes darkened in a way she had never seen before. "That psychopathic bitch," he murmured, using a curse word that sounded shocking coming from someone always so composed. "There's more." She showed him the transcripts about the plans to use her pregnancy against him, the photographs documenting his attention towards her, the emails detailing how Isabella intended to destroy any chance of happiness for him. "She's monitoring my medical care," Sarah said, watching the anger grow on David's face. "She knows about the twins, about when they are due, and she's planning to use all of this to prove that you are unstable and shouldn't have custody of your children." David abruptly stood up from the sofa and began pacing the small living room, running his hands through his hair in a way she had never seen him do before. "I'm going to destroy her," he said, more to himself than to Sarah. "I'll sue for defamation, for malicious interference, for invasion of privacy." "David," he stopped walking and looked at her, clearly trying to regain control. "I'm sorry, it's just she had already done cruel things during the divorce, but using you and your babies as weapons." His voice faltered for a moment. "That goes beyond anything I imagined she was capable of. There's another thing you need to know." Sarah took a deep breath, preparing for the hardest part of the conversation. "Patricia told me that you've been interested in me for a long time, that you watched my work, that you influenced my promotion and my raise." David completely stopped moving as if he had been frozen in place. "She told you that? Is it true?" The question hung between them like a high-tension wire. David looked at her for a long moment before sitting down again, this time closer to her. "Yes," he said simply, "it's true." "How long?" "Since you started at the company, maybe even before that." He ran his hand over his face. "You came in for an interview on a Tuesday morning. You were wearing a navy blue suit and carrying a leather briefcase that was clearly well used, but very well cared for. You answered the questions with a confidence that wasn't arrogance, and when the interviewer asked about your ambitions, you said you wanted to build a stable life for your daughter." The specific and detailed memory caught her off guard. "You were at the interview?" "I was watching through the glass of the conference room, and I thought, this woman has exactly the determination and integrity I look for in a person. And then I thought, and she is absolutely beautiful." Sarah felt her heart race in a way that had nothing to do with the pregnancy. "David, I know it's problematic. I know there was a hierarchical difference. I know I should have kept a professional distance." He leaned slightly toward her. "But I could never do it. I always made excuses to check on how your projects were going, always made sure you had the resources you needed. Always. Always watching me from the office window." "Always watching you from the office window," he confirmed, showing no shame. "And when I found out you were pregnant, When I saw how you quietly cried in the bathroom because you were worried about the professional implications, that's when I realized I had completely fallen for you." The confession created a heavy silence between them. Sarah could hear her own heart beating and felt the babies moving restlessly, as if they could sense their mother's emotional tension. "And now?" she finally asked. "Now, I will do everything in my power to protect you and the babies from Isabella's revenge. I will expose everything she has done. I will sue her until she has nothing left. I will." "No," Sarah interrupted. "I meant, and now, between us?" David looked at her with an intensity that made her feel as if she were truly being seen for the first time. "Now I ask you if there's any chance you feel something for me too, because if there is, I would like to fight for it, and if there isn't, I will respect that and step back, but I will still do everything to protect you from Isabella." Sarah felt unexpected tears burning in her eyes. His brutal honesty echoed something within her that she had been trying to ignore for weeks. "I don't know what I feel," she said, her voice coming out weaker than she intended. "I'm pregnant, confused, scared. My life is upside down, and you represent safety and chaos at the same time. What can I do to make it just safety?" The question. Sarah felt completely disarmed. She looked at the man sitting across from her, powerful enough to solve all her financial problems, yet vulnerable enough to have his heart broken by a vindictive ex-wife, determined enough to fight against any obstacle, but gentle enough to whisper so as not to wake Emily. "You can start by helping me figure out how to stop Isabella without it destroying you in the process," she finally said. David smiled for the first time since he arrived at the apartment, and Sarah realized it was exactly that smile she had begun to miss during the weeks of separation. "I can do that," he said. "We can do that." And for the first time in months, Sarah felt that maybe she wasn't facing everything alone. Trying again, Topic 8. The Public Storm. The following Monday, Sarah woke up with a strange feeling in her stomach, unsure if it was anxiety about the twins or a premonition that something was about to go wrong. Emily had already left for school when the phone rang at 7:15 in the morning, too early for a casual call. "Sarah, it's Anna from Corporate Events Inc." Her former colleague's voice was clearly shaken. "Did you see the news today?" "What news?" "I just woke up." "Turn on the TV, Channel 7, or check online. It's about you and David." With her heart racing, Sarah turned on the television and searched for the news channel. She didn't have to look long. On the screen, a photo of her leaving the medical clinic was next to a photo of David, while the anchor spoke in a sensational tone that made her blood run cold. "And millionaire businessman David Miller, CEO of Corporate Events Inc., is being accused of inappropriate involvement with a pregnant employee." According to sources close to the family, Sarah Johnson allegedly became pregnant after an extramarital affair with the married businessman, who later allegedly used his position to favor the employee professionally. Sarah sank heavily onto the sofa, feeling the world spin around her. The report continued, showing photos of her and David walking in Central Park, him leaving the building where she lived the previous night, and even images of the clinic where she was having her prenatal checkups. The businessman's ex-wife, Isabella Carter, a well-known philanthropist in New York society, stated she is devastated by the revelations and concerned about the pattern of inappropriate behavior that could affect the custody of the couple's minor children. The phone rang again. This time it was David, his voice heavy with a cold anger she had never heard before. "Sarah, don't leave the house. There are reporters in front of your building and at the bakery." "How did she get all those photos? How did she know where I live?" the private investigator. She's been documenting everything for months, waiting for the right moment to strike. His voice was tense. I'm coming over. No, if you show up here now, it will confirm her version. Then what do we do? Sarah looked out the living room window and saw two news vans parked on the street, with reporters and cameramen organizing for what was clearly going to be a prolonged siege. I don't know, she admitted, feeling tears of frustration burning her eyes. I really don't know. The next few hours were a nightmare. The phone rang constantly, reporters wanting interviews, curious neighbors, worried friends. Sarah unplugged the phone when a journalist called, pretending to be from Emily's school to try to extract information. By 11 in the morning, she called Mr. Smith at the bakery. "Oh, Sarah, what a mess is this?" he said, his voice filled with paternal concern. "There are people from the TV here asking about you. I told them you're a hard-working and honest young woman, but they want details that are none of their business. Mr. Smith, I think it's best if I don't come to work today, or maybe for the next few days. I don't want to cause you any trouble." "You're not causing any trouble, dear, but it might be best for you to stay home until this mess blows over." When she hung up, Sarah realized she had lost her job once again. Not officially, but in practice. No merchant at the Grand Central Market would want the negative exposure her presence would bring. The worst came in the afternoon, when Emily arrived home from school, visibly shaken. "Mum, everyone at school is talking about you," the girl said, dropping her backpack on the living room floor with more force than necessary. "Jessica said she saw you on TV, that you stole a rich woman's husband." Sarah knelt in front of her daughter, holding her small hands between hers. "Emily, sweetheart, none of what they're saying on TV is true. I didn't steal anyone's husband. I didn't do anything wrong. Then why are they saying those things?" It was an impossible question to answer for an 8-year-old. How to explain manipulation, revenge, and the casual cruelty of sensationalist media? "Sometimes bad people make up stories about good people to hurt them," she finally said. "And sometimes the newspapers repeat those stories without checking if they're true." "And what about David? Is he the father of the babies?" The direct question caught Sarah off guard. She had prepared for lies from the media, but not for her own daughter's logical curiosity. "No, sweetheart. David is a friend who is trying to help us, and that's why they're attacking him too." That night, after putting Emily to bed with several reassurances that everything would be okay, Sarah sat in the dark of the living room watching the TV vans still parked on the street. Some neighbors gathered on the sidewalks, clearly discussing the scandal that had turned their quiet street in the East Village into a media war zone. The landline phone rang. She had plugged it back in, hoping it would be David with some plan. "Sarah Johnson." The voice was female, polite, with a clearly upper-class accent. "Who is this?" "Isabella Carter." "I think we need to talk." Sarah's blood turned to ice. "We have nothing to discuss." "Of course we do, especially about how to end this unpleasant situation for all of us." "What do you want?" "I want you to disappear from David's life for good, and in exchange, I can make all this media exposure go away." Sarah clenched her free fist, feeling a rage swell inside her that was unlike anything she had ever felt. "And what if I don't want to disappear? Then things are going to get a lot worse for you. And for your daughter. It's a shame when children suffer the consequences of their parents' wrong choices, don't you think?" The veiled threat against Emily made Sarah rise from the couch, trembling with anger. "Are you threatening my daughter?" "I'm just pointing out that media exposure can be very traumatic for children, especially when the press discovers other interesting things about the family." "What other things?" "Like the fact that your mother is behind on the house payments, or how Emily has some learning difficulties that could be misinterpreted if they reached the newspapers the wrong way." Sarah felt a murderous fury rise up her spine. The woman had investigated not just her, but her entire family, looking for vulnerable points to attack. "You are a psychopath." I am a mother protecting her children and her assets from an opportunist who wants to destroy my family." Isabella shot back, her voice losing its polite tone and revealing the venom beneath. "You have 24 hours to decide. Either you voluntarily disappear from David's life, or I guarantee you will become a media circus that will last for months." "And what if I tell David all of this?" Isabella laughed, a cold sound that held no joy. "Go ahead. He already knows I'm capable of bad things. But do you really think he will choose you and your bastards over his own children? Because that's the choice I'm offering him, his family or yours." The call ended, leaving Sarah alone in the dark room, with the sound of her own heart pounding in her ears and the growing sensation that she was trapped in a game where she didn't know the rules and where any move she made could be the wrong one. Outside the window, the TV vans remained parked like vultures, waiting for the next piece of meat to devour. And somewhere in the city, Isabella Carter was planning her next move in a war that Sarah had never asked to fight, but in which she was now completely involved. The twins stirred restlessly in her belly, as if they could sense their mother's stress, and Sarah placed her hands over them, whispering a promise she wasn't sure she could keep. "I will protect you. No matter what happens, I will protect you." The pain began at 4 in the morning on a rainy Tuesday, 3 weeks before the due date. Sarah woke up with a contraction that made her double over in bed, holding her belly while trying to control her breathing. During the 2 weeks since Isabella's threatening call, she had lived in constant tension, and the stress was finally taking its toll. "It can't be now," she murmured to herself, glancing at the clock on the nightstand. "It's too early." But another contraction came 15 minutes later, stronger than the first, followed by a damp sensation between her legs that made her jump out of bed in panic. When she turned on the bedroom light and saw the clear fluid soaking her pajamas, she knew there was no denying it. The babies were coming. "Emily," she shouted, trying to keep her voice calm despite the rising panic. "Wake up, sweetheart. We need to go to the hospital." The girl appeared at the bedroom door, rubbing her eyes, still half asleep. "What time is it, Mom?" "The babies are being born. I need you to grab the hospital bag from the closet and help me call Grandma Thompson." Emily fully woke up at the words, "The babies are being born," her eyes widening in a mix of excitement and fear. "Now, but it's still early morning." "Babies don't consult the clock before deciding to be born," Sarah said, trying to smile despite another contraction that made her lean against the doorframe. "Call Grandma and tell her she needs to come pick you up. And then call a taxi." As Emily dialed the numbers with nervous fingers, Sarah tried to mentally calculate how much time she had. The contractions were coming every 12 minutes, which meant she still had a few hours. But with premature twins, any complication could be dangerous. Her first instinct was to call David. During the 2 weeks of media siege, he had called every day, always worried, always offering help that she wasn't sure she should accept. But now, with the pain increasing and the responsibility of 2 lives inside her, pride seemed insignificant compared to the need. "David, it's the babies," she said when he answered on the first ring, as if he had been waiting for the call. "Where are you?" "I'm on my way. Still at home, but I need to go to the hospital." "The contractions. I'm already in the car. I'll be there in 15 minutes. David, there are reporters outside still. If you come here..." "To hell with the reporters," he said, and she could hear the sound of the engine starting. You're having premature babies, and I'm not going to let you face this alone." His slip, "my babies," didn't go unnoticed, but Sarah didn't have time to analyze the implications. Another contraction, stronger than the previous ones, made her double over the kitchen table. Mrs. Thompson arrived in 10 minutes in a taxi she had asked to wait. At 58, she still moved with the agility of someone used to family crises, and immediately took control of the situation. "Emily, grab your things to spend a few days at Grandma's house." "Sarah, where's the hospital bag?" "David is coming," Sarah said between controlled breaths. "He's going to take me to the hospital." Mrs. Thompson frowned. "The businessman from that TV mess?" "Mom, please." "Not now." "All right, dear. But are you sure you can trust him? The question was answered 15 minutes later when David arrived driving a regular car instead of the BMW he usually used, clearly trying to go unnoticed by the reporters. He rushed up the 3 flights of stairs and arrived at the apartment, panting and visibly worried.
How are you?
Are the contractions regular? Every 8 minutes now, Sarah said, leaning on him during another wave of pain. And I'm losing fluid. Let's go, he said, wrapping an arm around her waist for support. The hospital is ready. I called on the way. Mrs. Thompson watched their interaction with the eyes of an experienced mother, and Sarah saw something soften slightly on her face. Take good care of my daughter, she said to David, in a tone that was half command, half plea. With my life, he replied, and the sincerity in his voice made Sarah feel something tighten in her chest that had nothing to do with the contractions. The trip to St. Helena Hospital was a blur of red lights, empty early morning streets, and increasingly intense contractions. David drove with absolute focus, stopping at signals only as long as necessary, and constantly talking to keep Sarah focused. Breathe with me. Inhale. Exhale. That's it. You're doing great. They're in a hurry, she said during a particularly strong contraction. 3 weeks early. Dr. Smith said that 37 weeks is considered term for twins. They'll be born healthy. When they arrived at the hospital, a team was already waiting with a wheelchair. Sarah was immediately taken to a delivery room equipped for multiple births, while David handled the paperwork at the reception. Are you the father? The nurse asked, looking at him with curiosity. David hesitated for just a second before answering, Yes, I am the father. For the next 6 hours, Sarah went through the most intense and frightening experience of her life. The babies, eager to meet the world, were not willing to wait much longer. The contractions intensified quickly, and soon Dr. Smith was explaining that a cesarean section would be necessary due to the position of one of the babies. It's all right, David said, holding her hand as she was prepared for surgery. I'll be here when you wake up. What if something goes wrong? Nothing will go wrong. You're the strongest person I know. And these babies have the most determined mother in the world. The cesarean went smoothly. At 2:47 p.m., Miguel was born, weighing 6.2 pounds and crying with the indignation of someone who was taken from a comfortable place too soon. 3 minutes later, at 2:50 p.m., Helena was born, named after the grandmother, weighing 5.7 pounds and surprisingly calm for a newborn. When Sarah woke up from the anesthesia, the first thing she saw was David sitting in a chair beside the bed, holding 2 sleeping babies, one in each arm. There were tears in his eyes and an expression of absolute reverence on his face. They're perfect, he whispered when he realized she was awake. Completely perfect. Sarah tried to speak, but her throat was too dry. David immediately understood, carefully placing the babies in the cribs beside the bed and offering her water with a straw. How do you feel? Like a truck ran over me, she said, her voice coming out hoarse. But are they okay? Healthy. Crying at the right time, normal reflexes. Dr. Smith said they were the calmest preterm babies he had ever seen. Sarah looked at the 2 little beings in the cribs, still trying to process that they were real, that they were there, that they had come from her body and were now independent people who would depend on her for everything. David, she said, taking his hand, about everything that's happening. The media, Isabella, all this mess. You don't need to think about that right now. I do, because... She paused, organizing thoughts that the delivery and medication had scrambled. Because they changed everything. Miguel and Helena changed everything. What do you mean? For the past few months I was trying to prove that I could do everything on my own, that I didn't need help, that I didn't need you. She looked at the sleeping babies. But looking at them now, I realize it's not about what I need. It's about what they deserve. David leaned closer, his voice low and careful. What are you saying? I'm saying they deserve every possible opportunity. They deserve safety, education, a future without the limitations I had. And if that means accepting your help, if that means facing Isabella together, then that's what we're going to do. Her words created a silence charged with possibilities. David looked at her for a long moment before speaking. "And about us? About what I feel for you." Sarah felt tears burning her eyes, tears of exhaustion, relief, of a much deeper emotion that she was finally ready to acknowledge.
About that?
"I think maybe I feel something too. And I think maybe it's time to stop fighting it." David smiled, the first genuinely happy smile she had seen on his face since they met. "Then let's face everything together. Isabella, the media, the future, everything." That night, while the babies slept in the crib under medical supervision and Sarah tried to rest, David stayed in the room, working on his laptop on a legal strategy to definitively neutralize his ex-wife. But for Sarah, the most important strategy had already been decided. No matter what Isabella tried, no matter what scandal the media created, she would not face anything alone anymore. She for the babies, and perhaps, just perhaps, for a real chance at happiness that she was finally willing to accept. Outside the hospital window, the rain continued to fall over New York, washing the streets and preparing the city for a new day. And in room 312, a new family was being born. Not in the traditional way, not without complications, but with a solid foundation of honesty, determination, and a love that had grown in the most unlikely moments. Trying again, I'd continue topic 10, new beginnings. 6 months after the birth of the twins, Sarah woke up to the familiar sound of Michael crying in the next room, followed seconds later by the indignant wail of Helen, who clearly disapproved of being awakened by her brother. It was 6 in the morning on a sunny spring Monday, and the morning routine had become a choreographed dance of diapers, bottles, and attempts to keep Emily fed and ready for school amidst the delightful chaos the two babies created. "I'll take Michael," said David, appearing in the doorway already dressed in a blue dress shirt, but with his hair still tousled from sleep. "You take Helen." The natural division of tasks had evolved organically over the past few months. David had surprisingly proven to be quite skilled with diapers and nighttime bottles, compensating for years of absence in raising his own children with an almost obsessive dedication to caring for the twins. "Has Emily woken up yet?" asked Sarah, picking up Helen and feeling the familiar and comforting weight of her daughter against her chest. "She's having coffee and complaining that her science presentation was better than Peter's, but the teacher won't believe her because he's the principal's son." Sarah smiled. At 9 years old, Emily had developed a keen social awareness that sometimes surprised the adults around her. The school change, necessary after the first one became a media circus, had been traumatic initially, but she had adapted with the characteristic resilience of children. "I told her that competence always stands out, regardless of last names," David continued, changing Michael's diaper with the efficiency of someone who had practiced a lot. "And that she inherited from her mother the ability to do anything perfectly when she puts her mind to it." "You're spoiling her with compliments," said Sarah, but unable to hide the affection in her voice. "I'm compensating for years of paternal absence with excessive attention," he admitted. "Dr. Smith said it's normal." Dr. Smith was the family therapist they had started seeing 3 months ago when it became clear they were building a non-traditional family and needed help navigating the emotional complexities of children who had suddenly gained a father figure and adults who were learning to trust each other. The house where they now lived was in a gated community in New Jersey, a concession to safety after Isabella had escalated her harassment campaign, including hidden photographers around Emily's school. It was larger than any place Sarah had imagined living, with 4 bedrooms, a garden, and a pool that Emily used religiously every weekend. "The meeting with the lawyers is at 2 in the afternoon, David said while preparing Michael's bottle. "Dr. Mendez said he has news about the case." The lawsuit against Isabella had dragged on for months, a complex legal battle involving defamation, invasion of privacy, and malicious interference in business. But in recent weeks, something had changed. Isabella had made a mistake. She had tried to bribe a journalist to fabricate a story about alleged domestic violence by David, and the journalist had recorded the conversation. "Do you think she'll accept the settlement?" asked Sarah. "She has no choice. The recordings are indisputable, and her lawyer knows that if this goes to trial, she could end up in jail." The proposed settlement was simple. Isabella would publicly retract her statements, pay a substantial compensation, and permanently lose any right to interfere in David's life. In exchange, they would not pursue criminal charges. "And the kids? Her children with her?" David's face darkened slightly. Losing custody of his teenage children had been the highest price of the whole situation. Luke 15 and Gabriella, 13, had been completely alienated against their father by their mother. Dr. Smith said that when they grow up, they'll understand the difference between their mother's version and reality. For now, it's better not to force it. It was a painful subject, and Sarah knew that David carried a deep guilt for having chosen the new family over the children he already had. In therapy, they had worked a lot on the idea that he hadn't chosen to abandon anyone, but rather had refused to be blackmailed by someone willing to use children as weapons. "Mom, David promised he would teach me how to make the PowerPoint presentation today," Emily shouted from the kitchen. "After school," David shouted back. "And it's Mr. David. He said I can call him Dad whenever I want," Emily replied in a negotiation that had become routine. Sarah and David exchanged a glance. The relationship between him and Emily had slowly evolved, respecting the girl's pace. She had started calling him Mr. David, then just David, and in recent weeks had occasionally experimented with Dad David, as if testing how the word sounded. "One day at a time," murmured Sarah, a phrase that had become the family's mantra. At 10 in the morning, they were at the headquarters of Corporate Events, Inc., which David had relocated to a smaller, cozier building in Brooklyn, close to where it all had started. The company had not only survived the media scandal, but thrived. Clients had rallied around what they perceived as unfair persecution, and the total transparency that David had adopted regarding his personal situation had created greater trust with business partners. "Sarah, the budget, the ExxonMobil party is ready for your review," said Anna, the new events manager, handing over a folder. Sarah had returned to Corporate Events, Inc. 3 months after the birth of the twins, but in a completely different position, as a minority partner and director of new projects. It was a professional partnership that worked because both respected each other's skills, and there was total transparency about conflicts of interest. "Is the Maria Cecilia Foundation event confirmed for Saturday?" asked David, checking the schedule on his tablet. "Confirmed, and it will be our first official presentation as Events Pro Social." Events Pro Social was the company's branch dedicated to events for non-profit organizations, an idea of Sarah's that had emerged during a casual conversation about how to use their organizational talents for important causes. The first event would be a charity dinner to raise funds for daycare centers in the outskirts of New York. "Mrs. Thompson confirmed she can take care of the babies?" asked David. "She did, and she said if we are late, she will teach them words in Portuguese to get back at us." They laughed, a sound that had become common in recent months. Mrs. Thompson had initially resisted David with natural maternal suspicion, but had gradually yielded when she realized he genuinely loved her daughter and devoted himself to the grandchildren as if they were biologically his. Later, in the meeting with the lawyers, David's prediction was confirmed. Dr. Smith smiled when they arrived at the office. "Isabella Carter will accept all the terms of the agreement. The public retraction will be published in the same outlets that reported the false accusations, and the compensation amount has been fully accepted." "And what about our additional proposal?" asked Sarah. "Accepted as well. She will fund a legal support fund for women victims of defamation in divorce proceedings." It had been Sarah's idea to turn part of the compensation into a greater cause. During the months of legal battle, she had met other women who had gone through similar situations, vengeful ex-wives using the media to destroy relationships, powerful men using legal resources to intimidate ex-partners. The fund would be managed by an independent organization and would offer free legal assistance. "It's over," said David as they left the lawyer's office. "It's officially over." They stood on the sidewalk of Fifth Avenue, watching the frenetic movement of the city that had been the backdrop for so many transformations in their lives. Sarah held Helen in her arms, while David pushed the stroller where Michael slept soundly, oblivious to the legal complications that had determined their future. "It's not over," said Sarah, adjusting her daughter's blanket. "It has just truly begun." "What do you mean? Until now we were reacting, dealing with problems, resolving crises, surviving scandals." She looked at him with an intensity that made David stop pushing the stroller. "Now we can finally build something." "What do you want to build?" The question was deeper than it seemed. They had become a family by circumstances, developed a relationship amid chaos, and created a professional partnership as a survival strategy. But now, without external pressures, without crises to manage, without enemies to fight, they needed to consciously decide what they wanted to be. "I want to build a life where Emily feels safe to dream big, where Michael and Helen grow up knowing they are unconditionally loved, where your company becomes an example of how to do business with purpose." Sarah paused, observing his face. "And I want to build a marriage based on choice, not need." The word marriage hung between them. They lived together, raised children together, worked together, but had never formalized their relationship. It had been a tacit decision during the months of crisis, so many changes happening simultaneously. "Sarah Johnson," said David, stopping completely and turning to face her in the middle of the bustling sidewalk of Fifth Avenue. "Are you asking me to marry you?" "I'm asking if you would like to marry me, not because it's expected, not because it will solve problems, but because we choose to build a life together." David smiled, the same smile that had won Sarah over months ago in Central Park, but now filled with a shared history of challenges overcome and trust built. "Yes," he said simply, "I would love to marry you." There, on Fifth Avenue, among hurried executives and street vendors, with one baby in her arms and another sleeping in the stroller, Sarah and David sealed a commitment that had emerged from chaos but had transformed into something solid and true. 6 months later, they married in a small ceremony in the garden of their home in a gated community in New Jersey. Emily was the maid of honor, carrying the rings with the seriousness of someone who takes responsibilities seriously. Mrs. Thompson cried throughout the ceremony, holding Michael, while Anna, who had become a close friend, took care of Helen. Events Pro Social had organized their first major project, a responsible adoption festival that resulted in 100 animals finding new homes and raised enough funds to build a veterinary clinic in the outskirts. And on the last weekend before school started, the whole family was at the pool when Emily swam over to David and, without ceremony, said, "Dad, can you teach me how to dive backwards?" The word "Dad," said naturally for the first time, made David stop breathing for a moment. When he managed to speak, his voice was slightly hoarse. "Of course, sweetheart, of course I can." Later that night, with the children sleeping and the house finally quiet, Sarah and David sat in the garden, watching the stars that managed to shine through New York's light pollution. "Do you regret anything?" she asked, snuggled against his chest. "The time we lost before we found each other," he said, kissing the top of her head. "And you?" "That it took me so long to accept that I deserved to be happy." It was a simple conclusion for a story that had been anything but simple. But sitting there, in the home they had transformed into a sanctuary, with children sleeping soundly, they felt a sense of peace and hope for the future. In a future that finally seemed promising, Sarah realized that perhaps happiness was not about deserving or not deserving. Maybe it was simply about having enough courage to accept it when it appeared, even when it came in the least expected way, at the most inconvenient moment, bringing with it responsibilities that were daunting and possibilities that transformed everything. From the children's room came the sound of Michael making satisfied baby noises, followed by the soft giggle of Helen, as if the two were conversing in their private twin language. Emily murmured something unintelligible in her sleep, probably about the science presentation she was planning to impress her new teacher. And in the couple's bed, David fell asleep first, as always, a hand protectively resting on Sarah's belly, where a new life had begun to grow. A surprise discovered the previous week, but this time it would be welcomed with pure joy, without complications, without fears. Because now they knew that whatever came, they would face it together.